usually the response to end of life is if you have a terminal illness or you knew that you're going to die. Normally, there are behavioral responses as to the feeling of loss, grief, and bereavement. These are the items that are happening. Okay. So, have you purchased a lot in the cemetery?
Yeah.
Anyone? What among you? Do you already have burial plan? Because we're talking about end of life, one of the requirements is that you have a plan for your burial. And of course, you should have a lot where your body will be resting in peace forever and ever. I think that would be a remote preparation for you. You are still very young, maybe you're not yet thinking of that right now. Something maybe that is a very morbid issue at this point in time of life. But have you seriously talked about death? You have not really entertained that. Anyway, our objective for today is describe the grieving process of a patient who is facing death, list the stages of the dying process, what are those stages, and the behavioral component for each stage, describe the philosophy of hospice and palliative care. Why do we have to put the patient there? What's the reason for hospice and palliative care? Define quality of life from a child's point of view. So if the child is dying, maybe because of cancer, how would you help the child, at least for the last days of his life, enjoy quality of life? What should be the proper activities or intervention that can be done to a child depending on his age? Stage 3, cultural practices related to end-of-life care. So we still have a lot of them in your book. Describe the development of the concept of death and dying in young children. Secondly, how do child or children view death? What is death for them? If you are a toddler, a preschooler, or school age, or an adolescent, how do they exactly interpret death as a concept? Discuss similarities and differences in end-of-life care for adults and children. List signs of impending death. So some of the key terms here are advanced healthcare directives, which could be in the form of living will, durable power of attorney, and all those documents that the patient normally put into writing that pertains to his health and what does he want in his end-of-life care, just in case he is no longer able to decide for himself what exactly does he want, and they are all written in his advanced healthcare directives. Assisted suicide. Do we have to assist in suicide? Culturally competent, meaning when we take care of people who are dying, be sure that our approaches should be in line with the kind of belief system based on their culture. We have a good number of them in your book. Durable power of attorney. We will discuss this more when we go into that particular topic. Euthanasia, hospice care, informed consent, palliative care, therapeutic communication, and therapeutic presence. What is therapeutic presence? We know that just like any living being, whether you're an animal, tree, as long as you are living, you will have a natural process of being born into this world. You will grow and becomes big. You will have your peak time, then you will decline, and gradually you will go back where you came from dust to dust. So it's basically a natural part of the life cycle. But since growth and development starts from womb, then we have to assist the patient until he goes to the tomb. So care is from womb to tomb. Okay? Because there are still developmental tasks even if you are already dying. And therefore, that's still part of growth and development. Like for example, what is the highest kind of in the hierarchy of Maslow's need?
Self-actualization.
Self-actualization. Meaning there are still tasks that the patient probably might want even in his last breath before he carry over into the next life if he still believes in a next life. Not unique to the elderly. Acute care hospital versus home care or hospice environment. What do we have to say about these different issues here? So definitely if the patient is going to die in an acute care hospital, it looks like it's difficult to accept because of an acute illness, patient died. Normally, people who go to the acute hospital are younger than those who are in the hospice care. We knew that when you are going to the hospice care, normally you are determined and diagnosed by the doctor as more or less you will have time to live between 3 to 6 months. The longest is 6 months. Therefore, if there are two doctors who have the same opinion, then you can be channeled to the hospice care. And of course, there are different ways by which we take care of clients dying in an acute hospital and on a hospice environment. Signs and symptoms of death. By the way, the very reason why we are studying this whole chapter of end of life care is we would like to give the optimal care that is promoting death and at the same time the dignity of the patient who is dying. We call that quality of life. Quality of life is not only meant for people who are young. Even in the deathbed, you can still enjoy quality of life, and that's what we are trying to promote, even in the hospice environment. But the bottom line is quality of life. Okay. Signs and symptoms of death. So, what is this concept? Prepare family for the symptoms that accompany death. Finality of the actual death will come as a shock to most family members. So that's one of our responsibility, that when the patient are demonstrating these symptoms, then they are normally going to go now. So what are those? Can you please list down those impending signs of death? Number 1 is anorexia, pulmonary congestion, and cold and mottled extremities. M-O-T-T-L-E-D, mottled extremities. Other signs, of course, are patient normally has decreased urine output, slow pulses, relaxed and open jaw. So just take note of this relaxed. The jaw is open, it doesn't close. Mama. The jaw is open. It can no longer carry. The muscle is not functioning. So those are some of the signs and symptoms. Have you heard about death rattle? That's the breathing kind of pattern when a patient is going to die because of the secretions that are lodged in your bronchial tree. It's not moving. When you breathe in, you produce that as if you're snoring sound. or gurgling sound. Call it the death rattle. That's why, due to the pulmonary congestion, or we call it pulmonary congestion, because the patient's ability to cough is diminished, and therefore the secretion just lasts in there. It's not unless you suction it, maybe. But how far can you suction? Can you suction deep down into the throat, going into the lungs? Maybe on the superficial layer of the nose towards the throat area. That's how far you can go deep into the suctioning, but not really when it is on the bronchial tubes. And that's why you have that kind of peculiar sound for the dying patient. So just take note of those important signs of impending death in apnea. Okay. The process of dying. What is psychological death, and when does this happen? Psychological death happens or occurs when person is informed of a terminal illness. So if I tell you today, you see Mr. C, based on my finding, laboratory, X-ray, clinical symptoms and everything, this is really what you have. Your cancer has metastasized. It's affecting your multi-organ and it's damaging. And there's no way by which we can prevent it. Therefore, we would like to channel to hospice care service. So that event or news that is broken to him will cause psychological death. What is basically psychological? As differentiated from physiological death. Because physiological death starts when the body processes or body functions decline. Okay. What makes you you? Is it your body or your mind? What makes a man a man? According to logic, you are man because you are body and what? Body and soul. And one of the functions of the soul is what? The mind. Okay? So what makes a person is not only his body, because after all that body, when it disappears and go into ash, become an ashes, then the body is nowhere. But the mind remains. Where is the mind? Where will it go? Of course, it depends on your cultural belief system. For Christians, for example, they believe that the soul will go and be reunited to God. I don't know with the Muslim, with the other religions. Okay? And so, when you say psychological death, it is basically the person is feeling that his being is going to stop. But of course, it depends on your belief system. Because my being, if I'm a Christian, my being, I can find my being in the creator of that being. I was created by a being who is God. Therefore, when I die, I will just go to that being. I will just be reunited to where that being, the giver of that being. That is how we believe as Christians, basically. But of course, if you don't believe in God, that would be depressing. Because that's already the end of your being. You will not go anywhere. So therefore, you're terminated with nowhere to go. That's why it's good. It really helps a lot to have some kind of belief system like religion. So that's why we have psychological death. When your body perish, when your mind perish, because of psychological death, you are totally nowhere. So, but anyway, the bottom line is we have to respect whatever is the cultural belief system or religious belief system of the person. And we call that culturally competent care for the dying patient and of course his family. The family, we take care of the family also. Because we reinforce, we enhance, and we respect and promote whatever belief system they have as far as the death and the dying is concerned. Psychological responses of a dying patient. At this point, of course, we will be discussing what? The different stages of a dying person. It's not in this PowerPoint presentation, but of course it is in one of the areas in your book. There's a particular table there which has five stages. Of course, the first stage is what? Denial. And what is the famous question? Why me? So what is the accompanying behavior when the person is in denial? What does he do? He is into shock. And he feels numb about the news. If I announce to you that you have terminal cancer and you only have 6 months to live, the patient goes into a behavior of being shocked. He cannot believe. So he would be questioning the Lord or God. Why me, Lord? It's not yet my time. I'm just too young to die. You see, my children are still very small. Why should I? So that is basically denial. The second stage is anger. It looks like it has sunk into your being because you have that psychological death maybe. And what's the reason behind anger? Why do people who are dying becomes angry? This is a natural stage of dying. It is a reaction to what? It's a reaction to helplessness. You are helpless, and therefore, the way to escape that helplessness is to project your frustration and helplessness to other people. And that's why what's the behavior of a person who is into this episode of dying? He becomes very disruptive. He will shout at the nurses. He will throw things in the environment, the glass, the picture. So he will have a very disruptive behavior. Of course, that is not meant, because that is just a reaction to his being helpless. So if you're a victim of being thrown out by whatever hard thing in there, don't take it personally. Just understand that he is just passing through a stage we call anger, and that's something very normal. Otherwise, if he does not pass through anger, he will not be able to resolve the issue and move on to dying and accepting with dignity. He has to pass through this stage. That's why anger. Why me? And the next one is, it looks like as he sinks into, meaning he can no longer do anything about his own helplessness. No matter if he keeps on having so much tantrums and maybe blaming God and everybody else for this kind of situation, then probably it's time for him to bargain. That's why the third stage is bargaining. Lord, if I'm really dying, oh, by the way, during this stage of denial or anger, he might go into what? Second opinion. And he has all the right. Maybe the doctor is wrong. Let him give that chance to really, so that it would sink into him that whatever has been pronounced is really true. That unless he accepts the truth, then he cannot bargain. So bargaining is, Lord, my son is going to graduate next month or in 6 months' time. Can you please give me those 6 months yet? Then I can go. That's basically bargaining. We're trying to work, to find some time to extend. So when you bargain, normally this is the time when you experience a lot of anxiety, conflicts, and confusion. That's the behavior of the person at the bargaining stage. He bargains, though he is anxious. And finally, after bargaining, he moves into the depression stage. And what happens during the depression stage? How does a person respond to depression when he is dying? It's either he keeps on sleeping, but definitely most commonly is they withdraw. They become uncommunicative. Okay, that's just like any kind of depressed people, they try to isolate themselves. And how do you interpret depression as a phase of dying? Basically, depression is a stage when the person is himself grieving. When the dying person grieves, he tries to isolate, meaning give him the right to grieve for himself before he finally goes. And you know, some relatives maybe, when they observe that the patient is uncommunicative, they try to cheer him up. Cheer up! Is that therapeutic? No. Meaning, part of our education to the family is they should be able to know when the patient is already grieving. When they don't communicate, when they are withdrawn, let them be. Respect that moment. So they have to pass that stage before they can finally accept. Don't cheer them up. Don't cheer the patient up. So basically that's the depression mood of the patient. Okay. So the final stage is, before he makes a final vow, is the acceptance. Probably he will say, my time has come and I have to go. I have lived a fulfilling life according to Erickson, and I'm happy with the way my life has been. Yes, it is true that I have cancer now, but as to what I have accomplished in this life, this cancer is nothing. Therefore, I would just have to go and be reunited to my Lord. Something like that. Basically, he's already accepting. And all people who are dying must have to at least come up to this stage of acceptance. And that's the meaning of dying with dignity. You have no misgivings. That's why this is also the opportunity for family members who have conflict with this dying person to come, so that the opportunity for reconciliation and forgiveness can happen, so that he can really go happily wherever he's going to go. So, by the way, since these are the 5 stages, it doesn't mean that you have to start with the first, or it's a continuous process. At times they have to slide back again, go back to depression again, or to tantrums or anger. But of course, our responsibility is to allow the patient, by the way we care for them and through our therapeutic communication technique, to assist the patient to gradually accept. That is the goal that we have to ask the patient, to accept that he is dying, that he really needs to go. Once he achieves that, he detaches himself from anything. So that is also one of the indicators. When the patient has accepted that he is going to die, he has no emotion anymore. Even if you talk to him, he would detach himself. That's because that's the meaning of detachment. When you accepted, you detach anything or everything that has something to do with the world. Your relatives, your friends, anything. So therefore, if that stage of detachment has been finally achieved by the client, he becomes emotionless. And maybe what some of the relatives would say, why is it that he doesn't respond to me anymore? Because he has been with us. That's the final stage. That he would not want to have anything to do with anything about in this world, because he's going somewhere. And that's something natural also. So don't misinterpret the patient in that particular stage of the dying. So basically, this is how we try to describe the different stages and tasks that we need to assist the client as he goes through the process of dying. By the way, it also is similar to anything that we lost. If you lose your husband, you also grieve, right? You are in denial. You also are become angry. You also have what are the other one? Bargaining. You bargain with your husband or something like that. You feel depressed until you finally move on and accept that you have lost him. It's not just actually happening to a dying person, but it also happened to us in any form of loss. If you lost a big amount of money from the casino, so you also what? You also grieve. No, I did not lose anything. You deny. But you become angry also. Meaning, this is a normal process of grieving. Any loss, whether it's physical loss, emotional loss, whatever loss, financial loss, we do have to undergo certain kind of grieving. But of course, for a dying person whom we love, that is more pronounced in the kind of reaction we have for those clients. So what is this? Family behaviors related to the dying person. So this we have to discuss in a specific behavior based on culture. Of course, you have a section in the book that describes the different ethnicity on how they grieve. And let me direct you to some of them. Okay, number one. By the way, as we said, preparation and education are key. Helplessness and guilt should be quickly recognized. Pain relieving techniques should be given. Therapeutic communication is always very important. Okay, what do you mean by culturally competent care? First, when you say culturally competent, we have to include and embody in our care for a dying person the kind of cultural belief system, especially their religious belief system, so that we may, because it promotes their dignity as person when they die. Number one, how do you give a culturally competent care for West Indian? West India. For example, here is a guy, an old man who is dying. How would you promote a cultural competence care for a West Indian? And what's the principle? Normally, for a dying patient who is a West Indian, they would like the family to gather around in the room of the patient. Therefore, we have to promote that. So, what's the reason for the gathering? Because they would like to pray with the patient, and therefore allow them to go inside the room, remove, if you have to remove all the chairs there, maybe any contraption in the room, to allow the family members to get in, so that they can have private time and prayer with the dying. That's basically how the West Indian would like to treat their dead or their dying patient. That is a culturally competent care for West Indian. Move out the furniture in the room to make the room for the family, because the family prefers to be with the dying at the bedside to pray. So that's basically the principle of care. Second, how about the Hispanic? How do you do that? Hispanic people around. What is a culturally competent care for a dying Hispanic? What would you not allow inside the room of a dying patient if you are Hispanic? Kids. They prohibit pregnant women and children from the bedside. So don't allow pregnant women and children to be at the bedside. I don't know. What's the reason for that? Because the book did not give any explanation. What do you believe in? What if you have a child there or a pregnant woman inside? The dying person will snatch the child with him to go to the next life? Is that what you believe in? Will it affect the child in the womb?
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
the trauma maybe to the child, to the children. So that's the reason behind. So take note of Hispanic behavior when family is nearing death, prohibit pregnant women and children from the bedside. So just respect that. What about Native Americans? Number 3. Normally, this is something unique because for most people who are dying, a lot of the relatives and family members, they would like to be at the bedside. But this one, they do not want to be at the bedside. They would like to grieve in private, away from the dying person. So allow them wherever they could go. Don't ask them to get inside because that's not within their cultural practice. Native Americans. Avoid contact with the dying person, that's the principle. They do not want to have any contact with the dying person. Instead, they go away and grieve in private. I don't know what's the reason behind. What is their cultural belief system. But of course, if you know them that this is a Native American, you just have to respect that and promote. It's okay if he is not there. After all, that's their practice. Contrary to most practices of people. What about if he is a Cambodian? How would you give a culturally competent care for a Cambodian dying person? Of course, the way they express grieving is by wearing white garment. Therefore, allow them to wear, you can probably give a white hospital gown to the grieving family member to wear during their grief ritual. So that is basically the Cambodian. That is a culturally competent care. They would like to be grieving in white. I saw that at times when there are Catholics being, during the funeral, a lot of the relatives are all wearing white. At times they are all wearing black. It really depends. I don't know. Maybe they have borrowed that particular, the Cambodian, practice. I don't know if it's something cultural or something religious. But basically, most of them are cultural. Nothing so much on religious. So that's your Cambodian grieving process. What about Hindu? What is a culturally competent care for Hindu? They prefer to die in the privacy of their home in order to have the religious ceremonies uninterrupted. So, what would you do? Allow them to go home. If they request to go home, so be it. Because they really would like to die in the privacy of their home, with all the relatives there praying unceasingly in the rituals of religious ritual without interruption. So that's how we try to promote culturally competent care for Hindus. Okay, so there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Okay, you have them? Okay.
What about Jewish? Alright.
Jewish will take that up on the next chapter. Wait for chapter 16. If you want, would you like me to include that in the list? Of course, that will come in the next chapter. Jewish. Options for end-of-life care. You have option. For example, if you are confined in an acute care, what are your options? And if you are in a hospice care, do you have also some kind of options? Well, for acute care, the reason why they are brought to the acute care is they would like to be revived. They would like to live. They would like to seek treatment so that they can recover. And therefore, we continue the full life support. If you need to do a CPR, call 911 or a code to do a CPR, then it should be done. If it needs to be confined in the ICU for life support, then it should also be done. Removing all life support or life-sustaining equipment, that is a legal and ethical issue for the family and the client. And normally, it's the family that has a big say on when to stop those life-sustaining equipment. Because there are times in the acute care when it is only the ventilator that keeps the patient alive. Once you remove the ventilator, he is going to perish. And therefore, who makes a decision? Of course, the doctor normally will have to talk to the family about the real condition, and finally the family makes a decision on when to. Our DON went home 3 weeks ago in the Philippines because her mother died. She was still here, and since she is the eldest of the siblings, she is supposed to be the one to say, okay, let those contractions be removed, including the ventilator. She was still there. And then she went home to grieve with the family. So basically, the family has a lot of, based on their cultural. Of course, this is ethical and at the same time legal. You cannot just remove all those gadgets not unless there is a particular order or a decision made. Stopping all drugs except sedation and relief of pain. So in an acute hospital, the dying patient may opt to stop all the drugs. But in as much as it is the right of the patient to be pain-free and to enjoy all the comforts as he is dying, then we don't normally withhold sedating or those pain relief measures for the patient. But it is of course the family who may want us to decide on that. Especially if it is on the living will, that I do not want this particular medication or that particular medication or IV fluid, and I only would like probably pain relief. That could be specific. Therefore, if you have a living will, that's easy because we just follow that and that's okay. Do you have any issue here? Okay, stop. Now, in the acute care, what are some of our nursing responsibility to be in support of the dying patient? How do you show that you are one with the family and the patient in an acute care? And for that reason, of course, we have the concept of therapeutic presence. Okay? Aside from therapeutic communication, we also have therapeutic presence. And what is therapeutic presence? Just remain near with the family and with the patient. That is basically what therapeutic presence is. Your presence is always very accessible to them. And that makes them comfortable that somebody is always with them, especially a nurse. The nurse can help support grieving family at the time of death by allowing the family time to stay with the loved one after death. So that's another nursing measure you can do. Allow the family to stay as much with the patient. Because one of the concerns of a dying patient is what? He do not want to feel that he is abandoned in that last moment of his life. That's why seeing people around makes him comfortable that somebody is still concerned about him even he is already dying. Would you want to be abandoned at that last moment of your life? At least you would like somebody significant to you to be always there all the time. And that's a basic need during that time. And therefore, encourage family if they have to alternate so that somebody will have to be there all the time. Let it be that way, because that is therapeutic. Not only your presence but the family, meaning the significant people in the life of that particular dying person. So that is how we promote care for a dying client in an acute care. Let's go for the hospice care. Hospice. Support the patient and family through the dying process. By the way, what is palliative care? What does palliative care include? If you will be asked, what would you include in palliative care? In the first place, what is palliative care? Palliative is not something curative. It's basically just to ease comfort and promote dignity of the patient. So you would include a patient-centered care, analgesic, oxygen therapy, and laxatives. Those are the care measures that you can give to the client who is on palliative care. It should be based on patient-centered, analgesic for pain relief because he needs to be comfortable. It is his right to be pain-free. Oxygen to continually be sustained. That is because that is physiologic need. According to Maslow, number one need should be given, like oxygen. And laxative, because that is a physiologic need. Elimination is a physiologic need. Normally, if the patient becomes constipated, it's because of slow bowel activity, and therefore laxative can be given to promote bowel elimination for this kind of clients. So those are some of the palliative care measures that should be included. What about the goal of end-of-life care? What is the goal? Comfort and care to promote death with dignity. Meaning you promote death. You allow the patient to die. Because where else are you going to go? If you are in a hospice, you are not going to promote life anymore, but you have to promote death. Assist the patient to die. Killing me softly, right? So comfort and care should be accorded in palliative care. The primary goal of palliative care, of end-of-life care in hospice is comfort and care to promote death and dignity. Meaning dying with dignity. How do you die with dignity? If you have been abused sexually by rape, is that dying with dignity? No, because you were violated. Basically, dying with dignity is giving the patient all the comfort that you can give and allow him to undergo and on the step by step stages of the grieving process until he gains acceptance, because that's the highest dignity that he can achieve, to be able to accept that he's going to go. Otherwise, probably it would not be a happy death for him if he dies with so many misgivings still. But anyway, the problem is if you die on an emergency, you were run over by a vehicle. So how can you breathe? And do the denial and the anger and everything. No more.
Acceptance.
So It was just unfortunate that you died that way. So how would you like to die? Something that immediately kills you, or something that you can live over? Oh well, it depends upon you.
How about you, sir?
Well, of course you cannot choose your death. You have no choice. But anyway, we all are going to die. Regardless as to the nature, no one can determine that. But most people normally die just like getting old, having getting sick, maybe with cancer or chronic illness, and therefore we can breathe. That should be the natural. That should be the natural process. So primary goal. Okay, I think we're done with that. Ethical and legal issues of the dying person. Again, the ethical and legal issue is revolving around our value system, our culture, and our religion. What is ethical to others might not be ethical. For example, when do you remove those life-sustaining devices? That could be both ethical and legal. Okay. Legal issues are rooted in the law, meaning we only follow the law as far as sustaining or removing those life devices from the client. For example, if the doctor has not yet pronounced that the patient is already dead and you remove all the contraptions, what would you be liable for?
Murder.
Yeah, suicide or murder. Because you killed the patient, you removed without legal, pronouncement from the doctor that he is dead. You have no right to pronounce that the patient is dead. Why did you remove it? So those are legal issues. At the same time, it's ethical because you're not respecting patient's right. That's why it's always important that informed consent should be at the bottom of everything. If you're going to remove anything, there should be a permission or an informed consent. If you're going to do something, there should always be an informed consent behind those actions. Advanced directives. Advanced directives can be in these following forms. Durable power of attorney. What is the nature of a DPA? When you have the durable power of attorney, what is included there? Yeah. It is basically a document that names the person who should make healthcare decision for the patient. For example, I'm appointing you, Mr. So-and-so, my brother, to make healthcare decision for me in the event that I cannot decide for myself because I am comatose. So therefore, you will be the one to execute and make decision what is best for me. Something like that. So that is your DPA. You assign a person in a document properly notarized, of course. A DPA or a durable power of attorney is a document that is normally notarized so that it is enforceable. It is lawful because it's notarized. It is something very official. That the patient is the one who selected you, and you also consented, you signed that you will be the person legally liable for the future of this client who is supposed to be, cannot make decision for himself. Of course, the living will also may, by the way, when you go for the clinical, one of the area in the chart of the patient is what it calls the DNR, also the donut resuscitation, meaning the code of the patient, yes. Whether he is a full code, DNR, or whatever, or DNH, donut hospitalized, all of those are normally embodied on the code of the patient. Normally, there is a written order from the doctor that will say, do not resuscitate. Meaning you are already following an order from the doctor as enforced in his advance directive. Okay, so that's good to know. Because if you resuscitate a client who suffered from cardiac arrest with a DNR, again, you are legally liable. Why did you resuscitate when there's already an order that do not resuscitate? Once it becomes flat on the ECG, don't do anything. Don't even bring him to the hospital, DNH. So basically, those are part of the legalities of an advanced directive. Assisted suicide. The action of one person other than the patient to facilitate suicide. An intentional act which causes death. So suicide or euthanasia, or what is the difference between assisted and euthanasia? Are they the same?
No.
Which is illegal? Euthanasia. Because your intention is to kill the person. We call it, of course, mercy killing before euthanasia. Because you feel mercy about the person that his body is suffering for a long time, when there's no more hope that anyway he will not go, is not going to recover. Therefore, we give medication to finally end his life. That is basically euthanasia. Assisted suicide is something. Is it something accepted here? Assisted suicide, the action of one person other than the patient to facilitate suicide. Assisted suicide is basically giving morphine. And for hospice client, the goal is not to kill. But what is the goal of morphine? Which is part of the palliative care in hospice. And really, comfort. That is your main goal. I'm not going to kill the patient. My goal is to give him as much comfort as possible. He should be pain-free. It is his right. That's the only thing. If he dies on the process, so that's not my intention. That's why that makes the morphine an intervention that is accepted. Of course, in due time you will die. But of course, the highest priority is to make the patient feel comfortable, because that's the way to die with dignity. So did you kill the patient? Indirectly. Because the morphine will slow the respiration, depress the nervous system, and all of that, and he is going to die in some days or so. So that makes the difference, the intentional act. If you inject something that could kill the person, like a medication, that is intentional. Your direct intention is to stop life. But the other way around, your direct intention is to promote comfort so that he can die with dignity. That is basically hospice care. You understand that? Okay. Sounds interesting. But of course, these are all legal and ethical issues in nursing. So what's your role as a caregiver? A healthcare worker should offer care for terminally ill. Well, these are some of the things that you can practically do. Ensure education, ensure that informed consent is provided, ensure that the patient's family, culture, and personal feelings are respected, communicate with the team when death is imminent or has occurred. But personally, if you are the healthcare worker who is dealing with a terminally ill client, offering pain relief measures to the dying, even there is a risk that death will occur, it still have to give the pain relief measures. Because normally people who are brought to the hospice care are what? They are terminally ill with cancer, right? And therefore, one of the characteristic symptoms of cancer is intractable pain. And you have to give pain relief all the time. You don't withhold it even if the patient will die. After all, he will die anyway, right? So even if there is a risk that death will occur, you still have to offer pain relief measures. That's why it's continuous. 24 hours on IV pump, you have morphine in there running all the time. Okay. So if the blood vessel is no longer accepting, because at times the blood vessels just pops, and if you can no longer give through IV, you can give through oral delivery. But normally it's IV for morphine or patch, as the case may be, because patch can still absorb through the blood vessels on the skin for pain medication. So this is one of your responsibility as healthcare workers. Offer pain relief to the dying even when there is a risk that death is going to occur. And take note of that. Don't cheer up a dying patient. As we already said, when the patient is uncommunicative, when the patient is withdrawn, what is the sign? That he is grieving himself. He is into depression, and he is grieving for his own death. Respect that. No amount of cheering up will change that kind of thing, even if it's counterproductive. You are hindering the patient to move to the next level, which is acceptance after depression. Failure to recognize this need of the patient to openly grieve will hinder the patient to move on to the next level of the grieving process, which is acceptance. Okay, let's move on to the different views of people about death. For a child, discussion of life and death should be a normal part of the growth and development. When we speak to children, typically progress through specific stages as they prepare. Truthfulness explained in each appropriate terms is the optimal approach to each appropriate manner. Emotional impact on the family is often devastating. By the way, let's how do you explain that to a toddler? What is death for a toddler? How does he view death as a toddler? That death is something what? That death is something temporary. Meaning, as if you are just sleeping. He does not understand it fully. Meaning you are going to wake up maybe sometime. That's how toddler would look at death. Because of his magical thinking, right? Still remember the magical thinking among preschoolers? But for a preschooler, of course, he uses his magical thinking. Just like the toddler, death is reversible. However, since the preschool is, of course, is able to understand better than a toddler who is about 2 years old, what is the reaction of a preschooler to death? For example, if his brother or a sibling dies in the family, of course he will think that this is something reversible, that he will come back maybe sometime, anytime in the future. He just doesn't know. But the only thing is that he might blame himself for the death of the sibling. He might say probably, the reason why he left is because I always am fighting with him. So that could have been in the mind of, normally they blame themselves. If a sibling died, especially if they are always at odds with one another, that other sibling who lives normally blame himself for the, and therefore if that is the case, we have to resolve that. We have to help the child overcome that he is not the cause why the other sibling left or died. But anyway, just the same, death is something reversible for the school age. Now, as we go to the school age, how is death as being perceived by the school age children? Now it's different this time, that death is permanent. Once a person dies, then he will never come back anymore. Therefore, are you going to allow a school age child to join in the funeral?
No.
Considering that you already know that it is something permanent?
Yes.
What could be the reason? Why would you allow a school age child to join a funeral if he wants to?
Isn't that part of the acceptance? Accepting.
Okay. If he says that, especially if of somebody who dies, he loves so much also, he has a special attachment, then if he knows that he is gonna be permanent, then let him be enjoying the funeral, because that's one way of expressing closure to the relationship. Allow him to grieve, because that's a way of closing. Because after all, he's not going to come back. Not unlike the preschooler, because it's something reversible that is going to come back maybe in the future. But for a school age, normally he knows that he's not gonna come back anymore. And allow him and provide him closure. Okay. Allow him to mourn, because he already understands that things is permanent. That's the last time he's going to see whoever that loved one is. Okay, of course for adolescent, he is more mature now. He views it in as, he has that abstract thinking. He normally is able to express mourning. He understands better. So it's just like any adult person. For him, there is that great impact for a loved one who is lost, because the attachment, he has those probably good memories that he will cherish forever. Therefore, he will really grieve. Allow him to grieve, just like any ordinary adult. By the way, to promote grieving for children, you have to allow the child to participate in the care of a dying child. For example, if a sibling is dying with cancer and there are other children also there, allow him to participate in the plan of care, because that might be one way of grieving. And at the same time, if there is rivalry, that kind of rivalry that could produce guilt can also be resolved. So, it can be so perfect. Quality of life in a child allowed to return to his activities. So, for example, what is a culturally competent, developmentally competent care for a dying child? It is said that you have to allow him to do the activities that a normal child should do. Even if he has cancer, maybe, he can still temporarily go to school if he needs to. Activities that a normal child does, like going to school, let him be. And of course, the children in the school, the teacher should be prepared that they will see somebody with different kinds of probably, they should be prepared on how to treat the child. That is promoting the dignity of a dying child. Meaning that is something like age appropriate, right? Age appropriate for a dying child. Let him do the activity that is appropriate to his age, so that he can die also with dignity. Of course, we old people, I'm not, no, you're not yet old, maybe I'm old. Okay. Old people die with dignity, with a normal process of the grieving process. So, I think that's the lesson for all of this. And I think that is all about. There are something like 10 questions from this chapter. and 5 of the last chapter, or 6, that's what I suppose. Therefore, let's move to the next chapter. The last but not the least. So the title is Loss, Grief, and Bereavement. We will try to define what's the difference between the three. Okay, what is loss, what is grieving, and what is bereavement, and why are they necessary? After the patient died, the family is left. But of course, the dying patient also undergo into the process of loss and grieving, but the family also will have to be taken anyway. That's part of the hospice care. List the normal losses that occur during the stages of life. State how the response to normal losses influence response to losses of life. Explain the difference between grief, mourning, and bereavement. List the stages and tasks of the grieving process. Describe an emotional, cognitive, and behavioral response to grief. State two religious, two cultural practices relating to that. List two components of abnormal grief response, and state the response to loss and grief at different developmental stages within the lifespan. Discuss achievement of letting go based on the grief process, and state 4 ways condolences can be expressed. Okay, number 1 definition is anticipatory grieving. What is anticipatory grieving? When you anticipate, you already express the feeling of loss. You are already grieving even before the final loss has come. That's why it is called anticipatory grieving. Before the actual loss comes, before the patient dies, you are already grieving. Okay? That's why it's bereavement. Bereavement is basically how the person feels about loss and grief. It's a combination of both loss and grief. We will try to define later what is loss and what is grief. Condolence, culturology, funeral, grief, legacy, mourning. The concept of loss. As I said in the beginning before, loss is something not only from the point of view that somebody is going to die. Loss can be anything that something that you value that has been lost from you. Okay? Like for example, if you lose your self-esteem, of course you have to value your self-esteem. And we have to view loss as part of the natural process of life. Natural part of life. Loss is a natural part of life. And how does that happen? For example, for a newborn, for an infant, how is loss experienced? There are many ways by which it could be experienced. The newborn's loss of security of the womb. Of course, you were happy inside the womb. You were just floating in there in a very warm environment. But when you were released after birth, you feel so insecure. That's why you cry. From a secured place of the womb, now you are outside in an environment which is, meaning you lost that secured environment. But you see, today, the womb is no longer a secured place. Do you know why? Because there are a lot of women who abort children from their womb. So do you think the womb is still a safe place today? A lot of women are doing that, legally or illegally. They don't want to have children, therefore they abort. So where is the security of that womb? That used to be where life normally sprang, and now is no longer a good place where life should start. is a very insecure place. Maybe more insecure. It's better to get outside because at least somebody will take care of you. But if it's the mother who's going to kill you, that's a lot of embarrassment. Okay. Today's loss, toddlers' loss of being exclusive, okay, that's another kind of loss as experience, okay. This is the one. Toddlers' loss of being exclusive focus when a sibling arrives. Of course, when a new sibling arrives, the toddler normally becomes jealous because he lost the attention of the mother. That is an experience of loss for a very small child. Puberty involves the loss of perceived body image. Of course, you don't want that is a main developmental task of teenage life. They are so concerned about their body image. So if you got amputated, that's a big issue for teenage people. How come it could happen to me? That's a big loss. Teens lose security when leaves for college. So the security of the home, when you have your father and mother always supporting you and you're already alone and going to college, that's again another experience of loss. Meaning, really, as it seems from the beginning, from womb until you go to the tomb, there will be a lot of experience of losses of different, kinds. Therefore, let's treat losses as part of our normal daily life. I think what only matters is how you cope with the loss. I think that is the thing. Coping with losses is very important. And of course, that's the reason why we become nurses. We would like to assist clients to cope with their losses. But if you cannot cope with your own loss, how do you help others cope? What's the reason for? That's why Erickson is very interesting, because according to him, if those developmental tasks did not happen or not fully achieved from infancy, then how will you be able to cope with the next level of development? Meaning you have problem of coping until you become an adult. That's why motherhood, fatherhood, or being parents are very important function, because you're going to develop a child who is going to face life, who is going to be able to cope with life. So I think that's the importance of all this developmental task for children and adults also. So this is another kind of loss, very atypical. Of course, the World Trade bombing, Pearl Harbor bombing, it's something very unexpected, but a lot of people lost their lives. So it's a horrible event like war, terrorism. They are unexpected, abnormal losses. But just the same, we just have to cope with it. Yolanda, who just hit the Philippines some months back, 6 months ago, is something very devastating. A lot of people lost their houses, lives, and their livelihood. And those who survived that particular typhoon are still there, living today, trying to cope the bits and pieces of their broken lives, rising from those calamities. So therefore, really that's part of life. How do we respond to losses? Of course, as we say, we must always learn to cope with all these disappointments. Attitude towards loss often determines the quality of life that is maintained. So we need, if you are positively positive thinking, right? You are always looking at the positive, bright side of life. You're more optimistic. Then your ability to cope will be better, rather than becoming pessimistic or you're looking at the dark side of life. So it's basically an attitude, a mindset that could determine whether you're going to succeed in coping with losses in life. So I guess that's the point of those statements. Response to normal loss determines how losses are perceived and managed in old age. And as you are able to cope with life from childhood, chances are you will be able to cope until you become an elderly person in old age. So it's one victory after another. Because if you have a lot of losses in the past that you are not able to cope with it, that will impact on your what? Self-esteem. Because I have so many failures that I was not able to cope, I don't think I can be able to survive this again. So that's how you think and you feel about yourself. And meaning successes in the past will always determine successes in the future. But of course we have to learn lessons from failures and losses. That's one way of coping. Learn the lesson, move on, stand up, and make the best out of it. Tasks associated with that. Okay, where am I? Am I lost? It looks like I'm lost. When we're almost finishing. Okay, what do we have to say about this one? Hospice movement has enabled the terminally ill to experience the task of dying with dignity. Okay, meaning the hospice care is one way by which a person will have how to cope with a particular event in his life. Legacy may give the person a feeling of immortality. What do you mean by legacy? Meaning you have already a lot of properties. Probably you have many grandchildren, or you have written a book. You have been an author. You have a lot of writings. That could be part of your legacy. That your memory will be remembered as long as they are reading that book of yours. So that's one way of. Those are some of the tasks associated with death. And of course, spiritual connection. A meaningful task to pursue during the death process. So, if you have that religious fervor, how do you call that? Religious fervor, even in front of death, which is going to be an actual loss, will help you make a connection on where you're going. That's basically what spiritual connection is all about. That makes a meaningful task to pursue during the death process. But after all, because of your spiritual life, you don't see that dying as something that would be permanent, but actually a transition from this life to the other life. And you view it positively, that there is something that is awaiting you, a better life beyond this life. Grief. Now, I think we have come to the real issue. What is grief? Of course, grief is something of an emotional response. When you are grieving, you are emotionally showing for the loss. You have lost somebody, and therefore it shows emotionally. It is something that you have to go through. You have to express it emotionally, because that's the process whereby survivor accept the loss. So, meaning that's one way to accept the loss, by emotionally expressing it, like what? Crying. Or emotionally outpouring yourself to somebody. Those are ways of expressing your grief process. Normal grief response are crying, insomnia, weight loss, anger, anxiety. Okay. Those are the normal grief response of a patient. However, this emotional response should not be overactive, meaning, oh, it is accepted that you have to express emotionally. But when you are grieving, let it be that the grieving should not be what you call dysfunctional. I think that's the word, dysfunctional grieving. What's the meaning of dysfunctional grieving? When grief response or reaction interferes with life function. So take note of that. Dysfunctional grieving is when grief reaction interferes with life function. For example, because you cannot overcome and get rid of the loss of your loved one, what do? You isolate yourself, you forget your responsibility to your children. At one point, you committed attempted suicide. So that is dysfunctional grieving. That's okay. Right? Okay. You have to get over and continue with life. Meaning that's part of coping. If you are not able to cope, that becomes dysfunctional. And therefore you need external intervention maybe if your grieving process is dysfunctional. Well, anticipatory grieving is grieving that occurs before actual death of a loved one. Like mourning, expressing your grief. Before you also become lonely, you cry before the dying patient. That is anticipatory grieving. You take care of his needs. Anyway, he is going to be lost sometime. Therefore, that is anticipatory grieving. Now, the question is, as nurses, how do you express your anticipatory grieving? Healthcare workers can best express anticipatory grieving by what form of action? By being available to the family. Availability. Did we say before, a therapeutic presence, be always available, being with the patient and the family? Those are expressions of therapeutic anticipatory grieving on behalf of the patient who is dying. So that's the best way, the least way we can do for the client in terms of grieving with the family and the client, by always being with and being available for the client and the family during that time of death. If you need to go to the funeral, go. And visit the family, go. Okay. That is anticipatory grieving. Okay. Do you have any particular question here? No more? Okay. Role of healthcare worker, I already said that. Our role is to grieve with the client and call it anticipatory grieving. Just being available and always present with them is enough way to express our grieving with the family. Okay. At this point, I would like to take particular attention to how do we express, how this one, the Jewish people, how do we express mourning according to the Jewish tradition? What is how does Jewish people normally grieve over the death of a person? What's that? Celebrate? What do they celebrate? The mourning or grieving of a Jewish person or Jewish community normally is expressed outwardly by covering all mirrors at home. Okay. They cover all the mirrors. I don't know what's the reason for that. That they practice for mourning. So it's okay to cover all the mirrors. Why do you think? Do you have any idea? For Jewish? Why do they cover all the mirrors of the...
Maybe the spirit, they don't want to see the spirit. White lady.
So, that's how they normally treat. Then this one, for the dead person, what about the Arab American? Take note of the Arab American. Arab American family insists on washing and cleansing the body of the dead person. So let them wash and clean. You don't have to do the post-mortem care yourself. Let them do it. Just probably assist them what to do.
And what insists on washing?
Washing and cleaning and cleansing the body of the dead person. Give them the clothes, the towels, whatever they will need to clean the body. Because they like that. That is culturally competent care.
Mummify the person.
Do you have any kind of practice like that in your own cultural practice? Would you like to participate in cleaning the body? Especially if you are very guilty, like you have misgivings with a dead person. You would like to make the last tribute that you clean his body, maybe in payment for your sins. Okay. But that is, it has no atonement value. That is just a practice. To atone for sin is to do something for the client. But it's not that way. Okay, that's the Arab American. So Greek. So during the bereavement, what is bereavement? I think that's the last word that we have to define. Bereavement involves grief and mourning. And what is mourning? Mourning is an outward expression of grief. If grief is an emotional response, you express your grief outwardly. We call that its outward expression as something like mourning. Mourning. When you mourn, you emotionally express outwardly that emotion. Because grief is an emotional response, mourning is an outward expression of the emotion, and bereavement is what? It involves
mourning.
both grief and mourning. Are you confused?
Yes. Go again?
Grief is an emotional response.
Grief?
Grief.
Oh, grief. Grief?
When you express that grief, that emotional grief outwardly, that becomes mourning. Okay? Just like covering the different, what's that? The mirrors at home. That is an outward expression of grief. And when it's both grieving and mourning, we call it bereavement. You're emotionally affected and you express it outwardly, then we call it bereavement. Okay? So when you go to a funeral, what are you doing? Are you grieving with them or doing both? The funeral march maybe is what? That is an outward expression of mourning, where you're all in black, something like that. Because also the color of the clothes, like the black, especially for Christian or Catholics, we normally wear black. Like the DON when she came from the Philippines, she is all in black when she came to the school. As a sign of mourning, outward expression of mourning.
In our culture, it's white.
White, okay. So that's the outward expression in your culture. So let it be. Therefore, we should have some kind of knowledge about these different practices so that we can situate in respect and promote all these practices that promote the dignity of individuals who are in this kind of phase of death and the dying. Task of family, or almost finishing, preparing for a funeral. That's why it's good to have a funeral plan. What's going to be done? You should have money for all of this. And of course, the place where you will finally be buried. Or would you like to be cremated? Depending on your cultural values, there are still cultures who do not approve of cremation. When I went to Thailand, a lot of them are cremated. They are just a small cream all over the place. And meaning that's still very much practiced as a way of, in the Philippines, which is predominantly Catholic, cremation is starting to get accepted. But before, nothing like that. When I was a child, I haven't heard of cremation whatsoever. It's only late in this, maybe 20 years ago, that cremation started to be becoming a popular one as a practice. Of course, I don't want to be burned. I'm already dark and I will become darker. Imagine you're already dead from an illness, and then although your body doesn't feel anything anymore, still you're gonna be burned. I'd rather be eaten by the worms. At least my body will still be of benefit to the worms and to the soil. Well, of course, it's your choice. If you would like to hang yourself, that's up to you. Then reorganization of roles. Of course, when there is a death, normally, if the father dies, somebody will have to take the major role of the father, and other will help him. And they will be assuming you set up in the families from the death of a loved one. Response to needs of young children, assess resources. Well, anyway, for hospice care, normally, as we said, it extends on the first year after the death of the person, and the family normally is being taken care of as part of the hospice care. We still send them greetings, and all of that we try to communicate how are they progressing to the grieving process, because normally, the normal grieving is from 6 months to 1 year. Beyond that, that's OA.
What?
You must be able to get, you should have got over after a year. That's the normal process.
Overactive.
But of course, it's individual, case-to-case basis. But for most people, normally within a year, you should have moved on already, start to move on. Especially if the cause of death is something normal, that it was not like the atypical kind of death, you were raped or very horrible ways by which person died. It's difficult, especially if you still have justice that you would like to seek on behalf of the person who died. That probably will take time to recover. But don't be OA. But who will say you're OA? This is my life. This is how I feel. How can you judge me OA? Mind your own business. If I want to live for life, so let me be. Grief early in the life cycle, pregnant women, infants, children. Okay, do we have to discuss all these issues? No.
We have therapeutic communication.
Of course, after death, normally we need to reintegrate ourselves again, and for the healing process, make the adjustment, mastering of the pathway towards grief and healing. Condolences, grief experience is life-changing. Goal is to move successfully into a new life that includes many changes. So basically, the grieving process is allowed because we have to move on. Okay? I don't think we have more issues to cover for now. So I'll be seeing you. By the way, so that you can have still some kind of review, would you like the test to be something like 9:30?
Yes.
11:30.
9:30? But you still have to come in time.
Yes,
Study here, maybe have some final exchanges.
9:30.
What's that?
9:30.
9:30.
In the afternoon.
Ayun po. Bye.
Parang ayoko na manood eh. Parang ayoko na manood eh. Wala kami bilis.
Happy study, really.
Hi, YouTube. Happy
Should be all